Las Vegas shimmers in the desert night, a neon oasis where fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye. Among its 500,000 residents in the early 2000s was Shauna Ann Castleton, a woman whose own story would become as dark as the shadows between the bright casino lights. Born into the strict confines of a Mormon family in Salt Lake City, Shauna broke free at 28, drawn 500 miles south to the pulsing heart of Sin City in '94. She started in high-end retail, selling cosmetics at Saks Fifth Avenue and Neiman Marcus, but the allure of Vegas nightlife beckoned. The tips were better, the energy was intoxicating, and soon she found herself mixing drinks and dreams at the Fiesta Casino before landing a coveted position at the prestigious Palms Hotel Casino. Those who worked alongside Shauna described her as a burst of sunshine in the artificial twilight of the casino floor. She had this infectious laugh, recalled Maria Henderson, a fellow cocktail waitress. Even at 3 a.m. after a double shift, she'd still be smiling. Despite years in the industry, colleagues noted she maintained an almost childlike innocence that seemed at odds with the cynical nature of her surroundings. In 2002, fate dealt Shauna what seemed like a winning hand. George Tiaffay, a regular at the Palms, caught her eye. A former West Point cadet turned firefighter, George appeared to be the perfect match, the homecoming king with the hero's job. His family would later describe him as charismatic and charming, always eager to help others. But sometimes, as investigators would later note, the brightest smiles hide the darkest secrets. Their whirlwind romance quickly led to the birth of their daughter, Madison, in 2003, followed by a picture-perfect Hawaiian beach wedding. Yet, beneath the surface, financial pressures were building like a fault line under the Nevada desert. The 2008 housing market crash hit George hard, shifting the financial burden to Shauna's shoulders. It was then that the first cracks began to show. "It was like watching someone flip a switch," said Jennifer Martinez, Shauna's closest friend at the Palms. George went from protective to possessive almost overnight. The controlling behavior escalated gradually. A critical comment here, a jealous accusation there. Then came the day Madison heard her father call her mother a derogatory name as she left for work, a moment that Shauna would later tell friends was a turning point. Perhaps the strangest development was George's inexplicable friendship with a homeless man he hired for odd jobs around their property. "She told me she'd sometimes catch this guy just staring at her through windows," Martinez would later tell investigators. But George insisted he was harmless. By early 2010, Shauna had moved to a townhouse in Summerlin, a seemingly safe suburban enclave of Las Vegas. The couple began sharing custody of Madison and attended marriage counseling, going through the motions of reconciliation. But as any gambler knows, sometimes the smart money is on walking away from the table. In the months following their separation, Shauna's text messages to George revealed both hope and resignation. "Once we live separate, I don't think there's any going back." These words would later take on a haunting significance. George, meanwhile, confided in his firefighter colleagues about his reluctance to divorce, specifically mentioning the complications it would bring, a statement investigators would later scrutinize. The first red flag appeared on a Tuesday evening in early spring. After a typical late shift, Shauna returned to her Summerlin townhouse to find it violated. The break-in showed peculiar characteristics that experienced detectives would later flag as unusual. While valuable items were taken, including her engagement ring, the theft of her bikini bottoms suggested something more sinister than a routine burglary. Even more disturbing was the calling card left behind, a pair of boxer briefs placed with what appeared to be deliberate intent. Despite filing a police report, the case went cold, a missed opportunity that would haunt local law enforcement. On the night of her death, Shauna followed her usual routine. Security cameras at the Palms captured her leaving work at 3:04 a.m., her final moments preserved in grainy footage. The drive home typically took 30 minutes through Vegas's empty early morning streets. She pulled into her garage around 3:30 a.m., unaware she was entering what criminologists call the kill zone. The discovery of her body came hours later, when George arrived with their 8-year-old daughter, Madison, to collect some belongings. His 911 call, recorded at 2:47 p.m., would later become crucial evidence. The call captured several key details: George's immediate identification of the scene as both a break-in and murder, his observation of rigor mortis, stiff, and his urgent need to remove Madison from the scene. His statement about the open garage door, "It's never open," would later prove significant to investigators. As the dispatcher gathered information, George's responses painted a timeline. His last contact with Shauna approximately 36 hours earlier, his shift at the fire department, and his current location in the garage with Madison. His firefighter training was evident in his methodical responses, though behavioral analysts would later note subtle irregularities in his speech patterns during the call. The placement of Shauna's body and the state of the crime scene suggested this was no random act of violence. The ransacking showed signs of staging, a detail that experienced homicide detectives immediately noticed upon arrival. Every overturned drawer and scattered possession would tell its own story to the crime scene investigators preparing to process what would become one of Las Vegas's most scrutinized domestic cases. The 911 dispatcher maintained contact with George. "I didn't test the body to check for a pulse," he said, a detail that crime scene investigators would later note as unusual, given his medical training as a firefighter. The crime scene told a story of unimaginable violence. Blood spatter analysis revealed that Shauna had been attacked while ascending her stairs, a common location for ambush attacks, according to victimology experts. The murder weapon, believed to be a hammer based on wound patterns, had been wielded with savage force. Dr. Marcus Chen, the medical examiner, would later document defensive wounds on Shauna's hands, her fingers broken in what he called textbook survival response. The trauma to her skull was so severe that first responders initially mistook it for a gunshot wound, with one paramedic noting a crater-like depression in her temporal bone. A critical timeline began to emerge. Between 3:30 and 4:00 a.m., a neighbor, Sarah Martinez, heard rhythmic thudding sounds. "I didn't think much of it," she told detectives. Shauna always came home around that time. This window would later prove crucial to the investigation. The discovery of Shauna's personal effects, her phone, health card, and makeup, scattered along a nearby road suggested either a hasty escape or, as some detectives suspected, staged evidence disposal. The items were found by Robert Kendrick, a local resident walking his dog at dawn. Following standard protocol, detectives first focused on George Tiaffay. His alibi appeared solid, a 24-hour shift at Fire Station 7, confirmed by multiple colleagues. But seasoned homicide detective Maria Rodriguez wasn't entirely convinced. "Perfect alibis sometimes hide perfect crimes," she would later write in her case notes. The investigation faced multiple possibilities. Was the earlier burglary, with its bizarre signature of stolen bikini bottoms and planted boxer briefs, a precursor to murder? Could a stalker have targeted Shauna through her casino work? Was this a robbery gone wrong, or something more personal? The fear spread through Las Vegas's night shift community, particularly among casino workers who, like Shauna, worked the graveyard shift. Security at several establishments increased their parking lot patrols. But Shauna's sister Paula harbored darker suspicions. Her call to George took an unexpected turn when he deflected to a grief counselor, a move that raised red flags for Paula. "I have my suspicions that her husband may be involved in this," she stated bluntly, drawing from countless conversations with her sister. "I highly suspect that he may be involved." Within hours, Paula and her husband were on a flight to Las Vegas, their minds racing with details Shauna had shared over the years. Paula would later tell investigators, "The way she died, knowing she was conscious, fighting back. My sister knew her killer." The broken fingers, the defensive wounds, each detail suggested Shauna had fought desperately for her life. 24 hours after the discovery of Shauna's body, a tip would arrive that would change everything. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a street-level informant known as Big Will. His testimony would crack open what investigators had begun to suspect was more than a simple home invasion gone wrong. "The way he told me about it," Big Will recounted to Detective Rodriguez, "it wasn't like someone describing a murder. Greyhound was laughing, almost giddy, like he'd just finished a job he was proud of." This behavioral detail immediately caught the attention of FBI profilers later consulted on the case. Greyhound was identified as Noel Stevens, a homeless man whose criminal record showed a pattern of petty theft and drug offenses. His hunting grounds were predictable: the Albertsons supermarket and adjacent gas station, where he alternated between shoplifting and small-time drug deals. It was here, in the harsh Nevada sun, that police surveillance teams spotted him. The arrest was strategically simple. Stevens was carrying enough illegal substances to hold him while investigators dug deeper. But it was his phone that would prove to be the smoking gun. Among his sparse contacts, one name stood out: George. When questioned, Stevens' casual response sent chills through the interrogation room. "That's my friend, the firefighter." The geographic profile of the crime suddenly shifted. Stevens' homeless encampment was miles from Shauna's suburban townhouse, an unusual radius of operation for a transient criminal. As CSI teams combed the desert around his tent, they discovered a cache of evidence that seemed almost too perfectly preserved: blood-stained trousers, a hammer price tag, and soiled underwear. "Career criminals don't usually keep their evidence," noted Detective Sarah Martinez. This felt different, almost like insurance. The investigation's turning point came through old-fashioned receipt tracking. The hammer's price tag led to surveillance footage that blew the case wide open: George Tiaffay and Noel Stevens shopping together, carefully selecting what would become the murder weapon. The timestamp on the footage would later prove crucial in establishing premeditation. "It was like watching a master class in manipulation," commented Dr. Rachel Klein, a forensic psychologist who later analyzed the case. George had found someone vulnerable, someone he could control, and groomed him for a specific purpose. The evidence mounted. The earlier break-in now appeared to be a dry run. The stolen bikini bottoms suggested a disturbing level of premeditation. The scattered personal items along the road pointed to staged misdirection. The hammer purchase showed careful planning. When confronted with the overwhelming evidence, Stevens began to crack, but his confession would reveal something even more chilling. This wasn't just a murder for hire. It was an elaborately orchestrated plot where George Tiaffay had found his perfect weapon: a disposable assassin who had been hiding in plain sight as the creepy handyman Shauna had feared all along. Stevens' confession unraveled like a noir film script. $600 was the price tag George Tiaffay had placed on his wife's life. The meticulous planning revealed a calculated precision that prosecutors would later cite as evidence of premeditation. The duplicated key, the purchased dark clothing, even the staged burglary 3 weeks earlier, a dress rehearsal for murder. September 29th's timeline emerged in horrific detail. "I waited in her closet first," Stevens told detectives, his matter-of-fact delivery chilling the interrogation room. Then moved to the living room when I heard her car. The attack unfolded on the stairs, a location chosen, investigators believed, to maximize Shauna's vulnerability. Dr. Emily Chen, the medical examiner, would later testify that the 17 hammer strikes showed both fury and determination. Even after the hammer broke, the perpetrator continued with just the head, she noted. This suggests a level of commitment to the act that goes beyond a typical contract killing. Shauna's final words, "Why are you doing this?" repeated over and over, would haunt the investigation team. Detective Rodriguez later commented, "Those weren't the words of someone facing a stranger. On some level, she knew this wasn't random. The murder weapon's recovery from its desert grave provided the physical evidence the prosecution needed." 9 days after Shauna's body was discovered, on October 8th, the case reached its turning point. When detectives informed George's family of his suspected involvement, his sister's warning call triggered what behavioral analysts would later identify as a classic consciousness of guilt response. George's attempted suicide was telling. 80 miles per hour, head-on into a concrete wall at the intersection of Summerlin Parkway and the Las Vegas Beltway. Accident reconstructionists found no brake marks, a detail that spoke volumes about intent. His survival, secured only by his seatbelt, seemed almost like cosmic irony. His response to arrest was equally revealing. "Okay," he said from his hospital bed before asking about his attorney and, bizarrely, about taking a shower, a request that veteran detectives noted as unusual prioritization for someone just ashamed of orchestrating his wife's murder. The legal machinery moved swiftly. Stevens, facing the death penalty, opted for self-preservation, accepting a plea deal of 42 years to life in exchange for his testimony. Deputy District Attorney Mark DiGiacomo would later call it a deal with the devil to catch a demon. By August 2015, George Tiaffay entered the courtroom maintaining his innocence, but the prosecution was ready. Their opening statement would paint a picture of a firefighter who had used his position of trust to orchestrate a murder, finding his weapon not in the hammer, but in a homeless man he could manipulate and discard. Las Vegas had seen its share of contract killings, but as prosecutor Sarah Mitchell would tell the jury, this wasn't just murder for hire. This was murder by proxy, where the defendant tried to maintain both his alibi and his hands clean while orchestrating a brutal attack on the mother of his child. The Clark County Courthouse fell silent as the prosecution's opening statement echoed through courtroom 3B. The 911 call, played for the jury, filled the space with George's carefully measured words, each pause and inflection now subject to scrutiny. In a touching display of solidarity, Shauna's family attended every day of the proceedings, their pink attire a visual tribute to her favorite color. The lucky poker chip they gave prosecutor Mark DiGiacomo became a poignant symbol of justice, a piece of the vibrant casino world Shauna had loved so much. The defense mounted their case on character witnesses, a parade of George's sisters, friends, and colleagues painting portraits of an upstanding firefighter. "The man I know," testified Sarah Tiaffay, his younger sister, "couldn't hurt a fly, let alone orchestrate something this horrible." But as veteran courthouse observers noted, character testimony often crumbles against hard evidence. The prosecution's case was built on a foundation of digital breadcrumbs. Cell phone records revealed an intricate web of communication, 87 calls between George and Stevens in September 2012 alone, with 5 calls the night before the murder. As FBI cellular analyst James Morton testified, this pattern suggests far more than a casual employer-handyman relationship. The security footage from the hardware store became a Rorschach test. The defense saw innocent purchases for household repairs, while the prosecution painted it as evidence of premeditation. "Watch their body language," Prosecutor DiGiacomo urged the jury. "This isn't a contractor buying supplies, this is a conspiracy in motion." But it was Stevens' testimony that captivated the courtroom. Under direct examination, Prosecutor: "How did you meet George?" Stevens, slouching slightly: "I was sitting out front, smoking, drinking. He was walking his dog." Prosecutor: "Describe your initial relationship." Stevens: "Told him I do yards and stuff." Prosecutor: "Did he provide work?" Stevens: "Yes." The questioning established their timeline, but more importantly, it began revealing the grooming process. How a respected firefighter cultivated a relationship with a homeless man, slowly building toward murder. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Mitchell would later describe it to the jury as a master class in manipulation, finding someone vulnerable, desperate, and moldable. Each question peeled back layers of their relationship, leading to the crucial moment when their association transformed from employer handyman to conspirators in murder. Stevens' testimony unfolded like a slow-motion confession, each detail more chilling than the last. He described the evolution of George's murder plot with an unsettling casualness, as if recounting a routine business transaction. The initial offer was $1,000, a price Stevens claimed he rejected, not out of moral objection, but because he thought George was blowing hard, just another angry husband venting about his wife. But George's persistence revealed a darker determination. When the price rose to $5,000 with promises of insurance money to come, Stevens began to take the proposition seriously. The payment structure itself spoke volumes about premeditation. $600 up front, with the bulk to come from Shauna's life insurance payout, a detail that prosecutors would later emphasize showed George's calculating nature. The engagement ring became a macabre down payment. Stevens pawned it after the staged burglary, adding to his initial fee. Phone records would reveal a call from a gas station payphone the day after the murder. What investigators believed was Stevens attempting to collect his full payment, a meeting thwarted by his arrest. The technical details of the murder weapon selection provided some of the most damning evidence against George. As a firefighter, he knew enough about forensics to suggest a fiberglass hammer over wooden, anticipating that wood might splinter during the attack. This level of professional knowledge, prosecutors argued, demonstrated not just premeditation, but expertise being used for murderous ends. Stevens described the ambush with disturbing precision. He waited by the garage door, hammer in hand, timing his attack to the rhythm of Shauna's routine homecoming. The wooden hammer, chosen simply because I didn't want to go and buy another one, was the same one security cameras had captured them purchasing together at Lowe's, a seemingly innocent hardware store trip that had become evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. The prosecutor's questions peeled back layers of planning, revealing how a casual encounter between a firefighter walking his dog and a homeless man smoking cigarettes had transformed into a murder-for-hire scheme that would leave an 8-year-old girl motherless. Each detail Stevens provided painted a picture not of a crime of passion, but of a calculated execution orchestrated by a husband who had turned his own handyman into a weapon. Stevens' testimony grew more horrific as he described the murder in clinical detail. The mask, the ambush, Shauna's final words, "Why are you doing this?" hanging in the courtroom air like an accusation. He described mounting her fallen body, continuing to strike with mechanical precision, even after the wooden hammer splintered apart. The metal hammerhead became his backup weapon, a detail that prosecutors noted perfectly aligned with George's alleged instructions about wood versus metal tools. But the defense found their opening during cross-examination when Stevens admitted to experiencing auditory and visual hallucinations. Defense attorney Robert Langford seized upon this revelation, painting Stevens as an unreliable narrator whose entire story about George's involvement might be a product of his damaged psyche. "It's a compelling story," Langford told the jury, "but that's all it is. A story." The prosecution countered with a mountain of circumstantial evidence. The CCTV footage, phone records, and precise timeline all corroborating Stevens' account. They portrayed Stevens' devotion to George as the perfect vulnerability for manipulation. "This isn't about money," Prosecutor DiGiacomo argued. "This is about a homeless man so desperate for friendship and approval that he would kill for it." A darker theory emerged during the prosecution's closing arguments. George's recent gun purchase suggested a potential plan to eliminate Stevens after Shauna's death, creating the perfect crime. They painted a picture of a former Golden Boy, the homecoming king, the West Point cadet, the heroic firefighter, who couldn't handle losing control of his picture-perfect life. The jury's deliberation stretched across 3 tense days. In the gallery, Shauna's family clutched their pink ribbons, while George's supporters maintained their steadfast belief in his innocence. The courthouse buzzed with speculation. Would Stevens' admitted hallucinations create enough reasonable doubt, or would the web of circumstantial evidence prove too tight to escape? As the jury filed back in, Prosecutor DiGiacomo gripped Shauna's lucky poker chip in his pocket, waiting for the moment that would determine whether justice would be served for the casino waitress who had trusted the wrong man twice, first her husband, then the homeless handyman he had transformed into a killer. The Clark County Courthouse fell into absolute silence as the clerk rose with the verdict sheets. Prosecutor DiGiacomo's hand closed around Shauna's lucky poker chip, a talisman of justice in his pocket. "The defendant will rise," echoed through the courtroom as George Tiaffay stood, still maintaining the stoic demeanor of a man who believed himself untouchable. "We, the jury in the above entitled case, find the defendant George M. Tiaffay." The pause seemed eternal. "Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder." The first count was just the beginning. 7 men and 5 women had spent 15 hours deliberating, weighing 5 days of testimony and 3 hours of closing arguments. Their verdict was unanimous across all counts, guilty of first-degree murder and 6 additional charges. The man who had once rushed into burning buildings to save lives showed no emotion as his fate was sealed. The jury's second phase, determining parole eligibility, took just 4 hours. Their decision was clear. Life without the possibility of parole, plus 81 years for conspiracy, burglary, and robbery charges. The judge's words cut through any remaining pretense. "My sentence today is not based upon holding you to a higher standard. My sentence is based upon the fact that this was just pure evil." The former firefighter, who had once been trusted to protect the community, would now spend the rest of his life behind its walls. Shauna's sister Paula's voice trembled with emotion but carried the weight of vindication. "George is a controlling manipulator, and I think the worst hell for him would be standing in prison for the rest of his life and not being able to control anything." The poetic justice wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had orchestrated every detail of his wife's murder would now have no control over a single aspect of his own life. The victory belonged to many: Clark County District Attorneys Mark DiGiacomo and Pam Weckerly, the homicide detectives who had pieced together the conspiracy, and the countless supporters who had worn pink in Shauna's memory throughout the trial. After 3 years, the vibrant casino waitress who had brought joy to everyone around her had finally received justice. In Las Vegas, a city built on chances and odds, Shauna's lucky poker chip had helped deliver one final winning hand: the truth. Her story would serve as a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers lurk not in dark alleys or among strangers, but in the calculated actions of those closest to us. As Paula said in her final statement to the press, "We started this fight for her." In the end, the house of cards George had built, the perfect alibi, the manipulated homeless man, the staged robbery, had collapsed under the weight of truth, ensuring that Shauna's death would not go unpunished in the city she had loved so much. George Tiaffay's desperation emerged in a 107-page appeal, his handwritten notes marking a stunning reversal. For the first time, he admitted to orchestrating Shauna's murder, but claimed divine intervention and prescription medications had warped his judgment. God directed him to perpetrate a crime to protect his child, he wrote in an odd third-person narrative, blaming a cocktail of painkillers, hormones, and Adderall for his actions. The online fundraiser for his appeal garnered little sympathy in a city that had already rendered its verdict. When this failed, George turned on his own defense team, claiming attorney Robert Langford had ignored his mental health issues. Langford's response was unequivocal. He never indicated any kind of psychosis, nothing that led me to believe he was anything other than competent. The attorney subsequently withdrew from the case, leaving George to face his life sentence alone. But while George fought to escape justice, Shauna's legacy began to transform lives. Her family established Justice for Shauna, an organization dedicated to spotlighting the often invisible warning signs of domestic violence and controlling relationships. They made the painful decision to move her remains from the glittering city she'd loved to her home state of Utah, laying her to rest beside her father. A final homecoming. Madison, the center of Shauna's world, found a new home with her grandmother, spending precious time with her Aunt Paula. When she talks about her mother, she lights up, Paula shared, her voice catching. Their relationship was pure joy and laughter. It's in these moments that the true magnitude of George's crime becomes clear. Not just a life taken, but a mother stolen from a daughter who would never again feel her embrace. The judge's words at sentencing still echo through the Clark County Courthouse. Why you, of all people, would do something that you know would be so cruel to so many people beyond just Shauna? The question remains unanswered, lost in the twisted logic of a man who chose murder over divorce. Paula's final reflection captures the heart-wrenching essence of Shauna's last moments. I have no doubt she was thinking of sweet little Madison as she took her last breath. A mother's love, enduring even in death, became her final act in a life cut tragically short. In Las Vegas, where lights never dim and hope springs eternal at the turn of a card, Shauna's story serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators wear badges of trust: firefighter, husband, father. Her legacy lives on through justice for Shauna, through Madison's smile when she remembers her mother, and through countless women who might recognize the warning signs in their own relationships before it's too late. As the neon continues to pulse through the desert night, Shauna's story remains a powerful testament to the darkness that can lurk behind the brightest facades, and the enduring power of justice to illuminate the truth, no matter how long it takes.